Okay, funny slash embarrassing story. The first time I met Congressman Elijah Cummings, it was 2012, right here in this very studio. I see this bald, black, regal man across the studio in kind of a three-quarter view, and I breathlessly rush across the studio and say, "Hey, Congressman Lewis, it's such an honor." And he turns around and faces me and says, "Great to meet you, young lady, but I'm not John Lewis." Okay, embarrassing, bordering on mortifying. Congressman Elijah Cummings had a great time with his passing resemblance to his friend John Lewis, as this post from Congressman Lewis's staffer shows. And yes, he had a go at me a few times after that awkward moment. The second time I met Congressman Cummings, it was at an event in D.C. a few months later. And we had the most in-depth conversation I have ever had about the U.S. Postal Service, about its foundation in the Constitution, and the important role that it's played in building up the black working and middle class across this country, and why it's so important to protect those jobs from being stolen by privatization. It was a huge issue that he long fought for. I was lucky enough to get to know Congressman Cummings pretty well over the years. He was one of a small number of members that I spoke to fairly often, just asking questions or trying to understand issues. He was always incredibly nice, always the kind of person to ask about my husband and kids. He and his wife have been two of the truly kindest, most genuine people that you could possibly meet in Washington. But for the country, Congressman Cummings was much more than a nice man. He was a true American leader, both a political and a community leader. My producers and I were lucky enough to be on hand to watch him lead his community during the Baltimore uprising after Freddie Gray died in police custody. This was just one moment that we witnessed firsthand.
I don't want anybody to be arrested, nobody. Life is too short. So, I beg you, let's move on.
The people who came up to us during that time of so much pain and anger weren't really trying to listen to a lot of talk from politicians about the deaths of their children at the hands of police and the occupation of their neighborhood. But those same people knew the congressman as just Elijah, not a distant politician, but as their literal neighbor, a man who lived around the block from the center of the uprising and whom they respected and listened to, and who had the unique ability to convince people to go home at curfew and prepare to come back fighting for justice tomorrow. Elijah Cummings was Baltimore born and Baltimore raised. At just 11 years old, he helped integrate a segregated Baltimore swimming pool. He graduated from Baltimore City College High School, Howard University, and the University of Maryland Law School. He held 13 honorary doctorates. And he was perhaps the fiercest, boldest, bluntest, and most passionate interrogator ever to hold the gavel on the House Committee on Oversight. A mentor to 3 members of the squad who served on oversight with him. He was a friend to those being persecuted for politics and the worst enemy of the corrupt and the cruel. But most of all, Congressman Elijah Cummings truly cared about people. He was the champion of the black women's voting organization, Black Girls Vote, and a strong defender of voting rights. And he fought fiercely for the dignity of his neighborhood, defending it against the attacks and degradations of lesser men. It's fitting that among his last official acts, even in hospice care, was to sign a subpoena demanding documents about the Trump administration's decision to end a deferred action program that allowed immigrants to receive life-saving treatment in the U.S. And this was the moment in a hearing about the administration's indifference toward children that still rings, or should, in the ears of every American.
See, you feel like you're doing a great job, right? Is that what you're saying?
We're doing our level best in a very...
What does that mean? What does that mean when a child is sitting in their own feces, can't take a shower? Come on, man. What's that about? None of us would have our children in that position. They are human beings.
And now that he is gone, we all owe him a debt of gratitude on behalf of every man, woman, and child, American-born and immigrant. Thank you to a great man who was, by God, also a good man. Good night, and thank you, Congressman.